This podcast is powered by The Plug.
Ooh-wee. Hi, y'all. I'm Dani, baby. Living vicariously through myself. Hey y'all, how's it going? It's been a minute, so take a minute and ask yourself, how is my spirit doing? I don't think that we sit with that very often, and so just take a sec. With that answer, I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into what I'm talking. I'm solo today on this. I don't have any guests on this episode simply because I'm my own guest. I'm going to show up at my own table, probably going to talk to my ADHD a little bit, my autism, my higher self, and my shadow work that needs to be done. So those are my guests here at the table today. I want to go ahead and just get right into it. There's been a lot happening in my life, and those are where some of the greatest lessons are, right? So I'm recognizing that a lot of times that I go into spaces with preconceived notions, that I too have lived according to the preconceived notion of how people believe me to be, simply because of the material that I put out or different spaces in life that they have met me at. For instance, that started at a really young age. A lot of us that are in this age bracket, I'm 38, we grew up with parents that were parented with the technique of kids should be seen and not heard. And so then they, it kind of came into how we were raised, right? And so there were so many spaces and ways that I had to keep the peace in my family by not allowing things to be seen for the reality that they were. And the reality of what I was growing up in was actually a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect. Obviously, the older we get, we're finding out with people that was kind of the norm for a lot of us. And so we have a lot of this no contact relationship going on with our parents, going on with the people that quote unquote nurtured us. And nurture isn't just like, oh my God, it's so much love. Nurture is how our parents decided to take care of us and how they brought us up. And so in that, I didn't realize that I was actually taking care of them by keeping the peace and not letting it really be seen what was happening in our lives, because there was a shame body there and I wasn't aware of it. So I lived in the preconceived notion. And what I mean by that is that I would have teachers and people dote on me in a way of like, oh, such a happy kid. You're so happy, kind of a class clown, could calm down a little bit, but you're really happy. And instead of seeing that as like, there's some attention that needs to be paid somewhere, we were so poor, we couldn't even pay attention. So we didn't know that we could actually take a different approach to that. That we could take a different approach to that and ask the right questions or observe a little bit better, right? So anyway, I lived in the preconceived notion that I was a happy child because I was being told that to my parents, from teachers and other peers and other, friends of mine. Their parents would be like, oh, they're so happy. What a happy little child. And so I just became this illusion of happiness, this preconceived notion. And then the older that I got, I was only held to the space of identifiers.
Yo, it's Julius, and I just made traveling easier with the motorized scooter suitcase. Let me say it again. Motorized scooter suitcase. Yeah, that's right. The luggage has got a built-in electric motor So this suitcase, I can ride it and glide through the airport or the train station, through downtown, and it all fits in the overhead storage bin. No more crowded terminals trying to say, excuse me, y'all gonna see me gliding through there. I can hop in and off the light rail like it's no problem. I'm not struggling to carry these heavy ass bags of podcast equipment anymore. All you gotta do is just click the link in the episode description that says Smart Suitcase. Click Smart Suitcase and see what I'm talking about. I'm telling y'all, it's going to change the way, if you're traveling, this is going to change everything. Click the link. Let's go.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you or your company are looking to jump into the podcast world, now is the time. The Plug Agency is here to connect you to the full power of podcasting. You just record and leave the rest to us. The people are listening and want to hear from you. Theplug-agency.com. That's theplug-agency.com. Click the link in the episode description for an exclusive offer.
So I have a tough time with labels. I'm not a big fan of them, where I've met people that love labels. I grew up where everything was a label. I was only labeled according, like I said, to my identifiers. And those identifiers were really shameful for me. I was in a cult, so I was like the girl in a skirt. The older that I got, I was like the unruly child. I was the annoying person. I was the outburst kid. And if you look at all of that now, it makes sense. I'm autistic. I have ADHD. There's all kinds of shadow work that needs to be done, but I didn't know where to gain that attention from. So I acted out in these ways, and my identifiers literally were my identity, even though they were just the smallest little pieces of me, and they were actually signs of where neglect and abuse existed. And so I wanted people to, in a sense, live vicariously through my identifiers and my preconceived notions. And so I lived according to the preconceived notion that I am happy because people say that I'm happy. That's what they perceive, so I must be. I didn't know how to be authentic in a way of saying, like, no, it's actually tough right now. Like, I'm pushing through. I'm saying that I'm happy because fake it till you make it. I'm not a huge fan of that word either, because then our authentic selves don't really get a chance to look at maybe like there's some shadow work or some space that we just need to pay a little bit more attention to, And so in that preconceived space, I wasn't myself. I was comfortable for everybody else. I just saw something on TikTok the other day. It was really brilliant. And this woman talked about how we seen love, and that it wasn't that people actually loved her. They loved how they felt being around her. They loved how open and how much they could be themselves around her. Hence, not saying that they actually loved her. They loved themselves around a person. And so I started recognizing that when I was out in my preconceived notion ways, that people were loving how much love and happiness they felt from me, but they didn't actually love me. I was listening. They weren't asking questions like, how is your spirit? How are you doing? They were just like, oh, I just love you so much. And that was just a way of them saying, I love how free I feel around you. And it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just understanding that sometimes we are putting the preconceived out first, instead of being like, this is like, it's hard to say that we're authentic, right? I think we put a lot of pressure on this authentic space. Be authentic, be authentic. Well, the authenticity lays, for me, and I'm not saying this is a definition for everybody, but for me, it lives in the ebb and flow, allowing ourselves to change our mind, to shift, to be fluid. Yesterday, I was in a space of feeling a little bit of confusion. I didn't really understand some of the choices I'm making. And today I'm here like, whoa, I'm making these choices because this is exactly like where I'm aligning myself to be. But I had to get out of the preconceived notion that like, oh, okay, I'm showing something online and I'm not doing it for a FOMO effect. I'm doing it for a journal because my autism and ADHD doesn't always allow for me to sit down and write it down and make this like profound statement of where I'm at. Sometimes it's just me sitting in front of a camera and like showing up for a moment saying like, I literally feel nothing and everything at the same damn time. And it doesn't mean that I'm confused. It doesn't mean that I don't have a direction. It just means that I'm actually sitting with myself and no preconceived notion. And so coming out of these identifiers that always existed, it really started sparking in me when I started getting asked to do like interviews. I get these really cool opportunities where I'm able to interview artists or interview just like different spaces of the community. And I know that we like to go in really prepared and we're like, okay, I'm going to research this person. I want to know everything. And I remember stopping myself and I was like, I don't want to know everything. I don't want to have a preconceived idea of the material that somebody's put out and their accomplishments, because maybe that's not where they feel accomplished at. Maybe they want to talk to a different space that does like come together to bring this part out, but maybe that space is a little bit more intimate to them and maybe they'd like to speak about it. So if I go in, quote unquote, knowing everything, then I'm just going to ask those stereotypical questions that could feel a little dry or feel a little like impersonal. Like, what is it that you do for a living? When did you decide? And not that those aren't great questions, because we do want that material. It's more about like, I wanted to know for the spirit sense and the fluid space that they were in at the time, that you get to change your mind. You get to be in this conversation and grow at the same time with me and be like, I didn't know. In fact, I am just recognizing by being asked this question that maybe my life took a direction that I just ended up here. Maybe it wasn't actually like all these choices that I was like, yep, I want to do this, 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 and this, and that's what led me here. Maybe it's part of spirit and part of healing, part of community, heartbreak, mourning, grieving, celebration, jovial experiences, and all of those things. So I did this interview. I got to sit down with an actress in the community here through the Arvada Center. And I was just so excited to do this interview because I decided not to research. So I go in and I got to ask some really profound questions because I didn't have preconceived notions of thinking that I knew this person. And so I wasn't trying to direct questions, like circumnavigating a space where, oh, I know you and this is like delicate. I just got to be like, hey, like we're both human. How do you like to be called? What are things that you find as like an identifier for you today? Because yesterday could have been different. And that conversation just really sparked the preconceived versus the post-conceived. And I'm making stuff up. I don't even know if these are terms, and who cares, because we get to speak the language that we want to, and this is what works for me today. And so in the preconceived, I feel like we will halt ourselves from allowing ourselves to grow in just a moment of conversation because we're living according to this preconceived notion. Whereas the post-conception is sitting there like, oh my gosh, they get to learn about me now and walk away with some valuable information or some valuable space where we grew together, And so I came out of that interview. I learned so much about myself just in that space, because the way that this person got to answer, who you'll hear from here in just a minute, the way they got to answer was a little bit more like delicate, and they got to be a little bit more fluid in that and be like, whoa, I don't know that actually shaped me, or maybe that did, but I'm recognizing that even as a child, I was too living under a preconceived notion because I was told I was happy all the time. I was performing for my family. I was performing for people. And in reality, we do put on a lot of performances every day. We put on, and performance isn't a bad word, right? It's also like a safety, how we go about navigating ourselves in societal standards. We do perform a little bit, whether it's with our friends, with our family, or whether in a community or our jobs. We do take on different characteristics, identities, if you will. But I found that when I was living through my preconceived notion, I was living according to what people were telling me how they perceived me. And so when somebody else is perceiving you, they are perceiving through their own vernacular, their own pain body, their own journey, and all these things. And in hindsight, they're kind of putting their identity onto you about how you make them feel by being in their space. And so my happiness was almost a negative tool, because what I was doing is I was enabling people to not sit with themselves entirely. And I was, almost promoting diabetes by sugarcoating everything that I said, so that I would just be like, I wasn't a safe space for me. I was a safe space for them because of their preconceived notion. And so stepping out of that a little bit, which I still kind of do, because we want to read the room. The opposite is always true, right? Like, okay, read the room, be in tune, be aware. But if I'm being aware to me, I'm obviously going to ruffle feathers somewhere else. But if I'm being aware only to the people in front of me, and I'm not speaking from that space of worry that I'm not fulfilling their preconceived notion of me, then all of a sudden I'm creating this interesting dichotomy where people don't, or where individuals, including myself, don't even know who the real version is. The real version is every version that you are, because it's real for that moment. And what I want to do is open up more space for that moment to exist freely and not in this preconception. Another space that I recognized that I was doing it in a word was prefacing. I had groups of friends and community all over the place. And I would have people in my life that were really spiritual, and then people that were like my party friends. And so like, if I would bring them together, which was rare that I would do it, I would end up, if there was somebody in my friend group that had really been hurtful to me and egregious, but I was like living in this fantasy of forgiving them, and they still serve a purpose. And I was allowing them to be a placeholder and an energy vampire. And then somebody else would see that and be like, how come you're allowing that in your life? What I would do before that would even happen, before hindsight was 2020, I would preface a person to a person. So I'd say, oh, you're going to meet this human, but they kind of seem a little rough around the edges. They mean well. No, that was my preconceived notion, because that was how I protected myself, saying that they meant well. They didn't mean well. They said exactly how they felt, and it was hurtful. But what I did was turn it around to be something gracious, so that I could continue like thinking that I'm circumnavigating what they really meant. And what they meant was hurtful. They hurt me. They did these things. And so I was really trying so hard to be in this way of, I didn't want people to see the realness in other people. So by prefacing that, I was saying, hey, this is what energy you're going to feel from them, but it's meant to be positive. Like, don't think of it that way. And that was rooted all the way back to my childhood, all the way back there, where I was doing things to keep the peace. I was protecting everybody else in the preconceived notion, so that people didn't have to look at themselves and deal with themselves. And in turn, I was looking in the mirror and I wasn't dealing with me and my pain and my hurt. I was literally masking all the way up. And I think that's such a great disservice that I lived under for a long time. So being identified by having these identifiers for a long time, I was seen as the lesbian with dreadlocks. I had really long dreadlocks for a while. I was having all kinds of identity crises. I was also known as like, I had multiple names in the community. I used to go by Street Speaks. I used to go by Shug. And it was just all these ways of identifying myself to keep myself safe and to protect myself, so that Dani, if you will, didn't have to fully be exposed. And being exposed was scary, to be seen that there are days that I'm sad, that there are days that I actually really do severely struggle with anxiety and depression. But that's also something that enhances my joy and happiness when I come out of it. If I'm allowed to nurture that space and exist in that space fully, and not have to live according to the identifier of you're always so happy, but you're always this, I can always count on you to be this. Like, cool. I'm glad that you see consistency there, but the consistency shouldn't always just lay in me dealing with myself crying in the shower. It should be able to be a space where I don't have to preface how I'm feeling. I can literally tell my friend group now, like, I can't today. And they're just like, great, take care of yourself, take care of your spirit. But I used to live in a way according to the identifiers and the preconceived notions. And so I didn't even know how to show up for first times. And I mean first times of even going to therapy. I tried to have a mask on in therapy, going into having lovers in my life, going into having friend groups in my life. I was showing up according to what we're talking about, the preconceived notion. So the post-conceived, I don't think these are even real terms, and who cares? But this is how it is. My post-conception is I'm not worried about a person walking away feeling good from a conversation with me. I want a person to just walk away feeling like, wow, I could show up as any version of myself at any time with Dani. And it's not about there being a judgment. It's not about there being a space where I'm going to live vicariously through you according to your energy. It's like, wow, I get to be fluid and I get to show up as I am today. Because I think that we a lot of times put ourselves in such a space of cementing that this is always how I've been. This is always it. And that isn't the healthiest thing. If you've always been that way in certain instances, then you're also not allowing yourself to grow around the community that is growing. And so like some of that verbal or that verbing that, God, I can't even use the right words apparently, but some of those words that we use to identify ourselves, oh, that's always how they've been, they're never going to change. It's because we're living according to a preconceived notion. And so I really try hard these days to not do that with people. If people are going to meet each other, they're going to meet, and that's what it's going to be. I don't try to save face for the room anymore or preface anything. A person's energy is going to be a person's energy, and they're going to feel and read it that. I don't protect that space anymore. I just sit there and observe, because our interactions, for me, my interactions so many times were candy coating, and constantly putting in this space of like, I'm fine. I'm okay. It's great. Everything's dandy. And then there's a sense of sarcasm and that's just not healthy either. And so we use these odd forms of humor, if you will, to, again, circumnavigate around somebody really imposing a question on us. Like, really, how are you feeling? How is your spirit? And in turn, we're not even asking ourselves that. There's also these questions that we ask a person or that we sit in thinking that we know something before we ask it. So we're not even concerned with their real answer. We think that their answer is something different. And so we're not even listening to that person, right? And then we're not even listening to ourselves and our reaction to them maybe actually being open to telling us. It's just wild. So I don't anticipate a person walking away from me after, a post-conceived instance where they met me, they didn't know me before. I hope that it just enables this space in them that they get to remain in a fluid energy, that they get to decide to change their mind, that they get to decide to grow or to go into hermit mode for a little bit just to nourish their own spirits. That's really what I'm looking for. I've walked away from so many conversations where I know somebody had a preconceived idea of me, and I walked away feeling so drained, so sad, unseen, unheard, and I talked the whole time. And right now, my mind could shift after this. I could be like, there's no such thing as a post-conceived idea or a preconceived notion. But to me, that feels really real right now, especially in this season. I live in Colorado and I'm in a seasonal depression. It's minute by minute. The sun goes away. It's deceiving outside. You can look from your window and it could be looks like it could be 100-degree day out. And then you go outside and you can see your breath and it's annoying. So I'm just, we can look at a space and think, oh, this is what it looks like. But then you get out in it and it can be something totally different. So my encouragement today for my little self is to just not worry about how a person could preconceive me or what they believe they know about me, because I'm barely understanding that I'm believing things about myself. In going into a healing journey it's not linear. You're not just going to be like, oh, okay, today I'm going to work on this and tomorrow I'm going to work on that. There's triggers and they're real and they come out, and then all of a sudden these identifiers that you were holding on to, like an identifier of being, for instance, for me, an identifier is always going to be that I was told I was a happy kid. So I always believe happy to be like this overreach of energy instead of just like being content and sitting still and being in space. That can be a form of happiness. But the way that happiness was presented to me was to cover up something, to be secretive about something, to not allow the truth to be seen. So happiness didn't have the best or the best definition for me. It was actually sadness because that's what I was hiding. And I think that going into these conversations first with ourselves, maybe you don't know how you're feeling. Maybe don't put all these words to it. Maybe don't fake it till you make it, because you're using a word that holds this potency of being something. And if you're faking with that word, then you're never going to really know how it is when you are that word. And I think that that's part of what it's like when other people are living vicariously through you instead of you vicariously through yourself. You're picking up everybody else's definition. You're hiding everybody else's definition to it. And it's just funny how the polar opposites are just constantly true. If you're feeling nothing, it's everything in its entirety that is nothing that you're feeling, and our minds are just these beautiful tools. And I think what we do is we direct so much of our attention to everybody else's preconceptions to make them safe. And we bring so much harm to the definition that we are. And so that's why I have a tough time with the word happiness. Oh, I'm so happy. Oh, joyful. It's this and that. And we put control to those words, like you hear parents say to their kids where they're living vicariously through them. They're like, you make me so proud. You make me so happy. You make me disappointed. I'm not in control of the root of that. I might enhance it, but I am not the root. And for a long time, I had to get away from thinking that I was the root of the problem in some of the words that were being used, because it was, again, one extreme to the next. My parents would be like, these are instances. My mom would scream at me in the car what a disappointment I was and be just gross to me in the car. And then we'd go in somewhere to a store or something, and I would be interacting with the person, serving us or whatever. And they'd be like, oh, you're so cool. And my mom would be like, yep, that's my child. Yep. And take that away from me after just screaming at me in the car about what such a disappointment I was. So I don't have a grasp on some words and what they are supposed to mean. I have the opposite of those words and what they mean. It's like, it's wild. So I like to play on words a lot because they were used against me so egregiously. Also growing up in a cult. I'm going to rewind the tiniest bit. I'm in it right now. That's why I'm speaking about this stuff. So much has transitioned in the last couple weeks. I had a conversation with my mother that I do not have a relation. She thinks we have a relationship because she keeps holding me to the space and knocking at a door where I was showing up as a little child, and in her eyes, a little girl that was subservient and obedient and listened to use of authority. That's the door she keeps knocking at. But I'm never answering at that damn door. You're going to have to keep holding space there because that person doesn't exist, hasn't existed for a long time. So I get a call, and in her mind, she thinks she's going to get this young Dani version answering the phone that's like, hey, Mom, I love you so much. What can I do to make you feel better about the fact that you failed as a parent, but I want to keep covering it up? And yes, she did what she could at the capacity she could. But the older I've gotten, I said, these are unacceptable behaviors to me. I'm an adult now. So as I'm becoming an adult, I'm still further away from the goal of understanding my mom, right? Because I don't have kids. I'm not 60 years old. I don't have this sickness. I haven't lost this family member. I haven't gone through the things that she's gone through. In reality, I've lived in a parallel with her since the time I was born. I've lived in your pain body, Mom. I have. And so being in that space, answering the phone this time, I find out that an aunt of mine that introduced our whole family into the cult life has passed away. And so all these triggers started happening. And triggers are fine. Triggers are going to happen. You know, we want to be like, oh God, I was triggered. And then we want to deal with the story of the trigger. It's what you do with the trigger. You know, like for me, I'm like, okay, the trigger happened. I know it's going to exist, but that luggage is actually over there. It's up to me if I want to go pick it up. I know it's there, but I don't have to go fucking pick it up. And I'm not going to. And that's the trigger. The trigger is like, are you going to pick it up or not? And I chose not to pick it up. And so even though I picked up the phone, and that is the trigger, I sat with that and I would not let those old behaviors come out. The preconceived notion that my mother has, that I'm going to be obedient to her word, that I'm going to sit there and be abused in her language, that I'm going to be manipulated by biblical standard. None of that could happen. I simply asked my mom, what kind of relationship do you want me to have with you? What do you want here? Because in this death, a lot of drama always rises in our family. The only time our families get together is death, is funerals, and it used to be weddings. I don't really go to those anymore because, but it's always that secrets come out in the family. So you could look at this picture and be like, what a happy family. But the secrets in death that come out are so egregious. We held on to that. We kept the peace for that long and lived in a preconceived way for that long that we don't even know what the word happy is anymore. It's simply a word. It's not an action. It's not a feeling. It's a word that makes us start to protect ourselves because that's what we use to protect ourselves. So in that conversation with my mother, I was like, what kind of relationship do you want here? Anytime that I disagree with her, I'm uninvited to her funeral. Every time. That's what my mom holds on to. She lives in this space of thinking that I'm going to be crying at her grave because we didn't reconcile. Little does she know, I have reconciled. I have grieved a living parent. So in death, I will be set free from the preconception you have had of me. And I think that we do that daily. We allow certain things to die. We allow certain placeholders to leave. And then we get to sit with really how we're feeling. But instead of waiting for those spaces, I think it would be important to start showing up in spaces without the preconceived ideas and putting that kind of pressure on each other and on ourselves. And social media can be like the most fascinating thing. And it can also be the most crippling thing to our existence. And FOMO is a real thing. I heard somebody say one day that they had phobia, fear of being invited, because now I got to cancel. And that's me, okay? But the whole FOMO experience, again, I think is also coming from the preconceived that we should be doing something great with our lives. And the whole idea of what is it that you do for a living? Well, I'm not doing things that make me happy because I'm being harvested for my labor. So there's all kinds of different ways that we go in to give people a preconceived idea of ourselves. So if you sit with yourself in the beginning, like I'm always asking you, how is your spirit? What is your spirit connected to? Is your spirit connected to what this term happiness really means? Or is your spirit connected to the preconceived idea that it's just a word and you don't know how to have an emotion towards it? So that's really where my spirit has been laying, is that I don't want to show up as a preconceived idea. I don't want to show up as this label and identifier only. Labels are very helpful, and I don't want to be dismissive of the work that has been done, those that have been on the front lines to help with how we identify and the terms that we use and the labels that we use to be safe. But for me, growing up, labels were not safe. They were a way of hiding. They were a way of protecting my family and not in a positive way. The labels were a way for people to not get to know me. I was just this, I was just that. To this day, I have seen people out of high school that was 4 short years. And if your focus was that was the peak years, I am so sad for you. First of all, I'm not here to peak on this planet, okay? That's not a thing. We're just here, in my mind, to grow and whatnot. But here, I still will get called, oh, you were the weird girl in school that wore skirts and was in a cult. And that's just what people decided to know about me. And so then they just think I'm weird and that they can pick on me. There's a bully sense that comes out in that. So then I, in turn, would pick on myself. We cast fun on ourselves. Like, yes, it's fun to be like joke and not be so serious. But if you are using something because of a preconceived notion that somebody has and turns it into a joke, and then you're further dissing yourself, like, that's just how I grew up. That's just what I knew. So not peaking on this planet, understanding that we're constant motion of growing, that things aren't linear, that things are going to trigger us, that we don't have to carry that luggage around anymore. We don't have to carry that baggage around anymore. You can simply set it somewhere. Also, you don't answer the same doors that you've been answering. I'm not behind that door anymore of the scared, small, protect my family, abused child. I'm not that person anymore. So if people are calling on to me in that space and I don't answer, and then they start throwing this stuff like, well, you're not consistent. You aren't, you used to be, you used to be, you used to be. And you remind me that that's all I used to be, then we can't have an authentic conversation here. I'm not asking you to meet me where I'm at. I'm simply wanting you to know that you don't know where I'm at. And so if you don't know, ask questions. If you're not asking questions, you're not interested, and you're going to keep knocking at the same door. And that's not my problem. So that's really kind of where the brain is at. That's where my autism and ADHD and all these things have to kind of navigate together and be fluid with together. Some days my ADHD is running more wild. My autism's super uncomfortable because my ADHD is messing the house up because I want to rearrange the whole thing. And my autism is just like, no, I just remember where I put my single paper clip in the eyeglass case on the counter, crazy stuff like that. But the same is true with how we try to hold space for everybody's preconceived notions of ourselves. The other part of that is that we have preconceived ideas of other people. So we could tend to hold them to a space. We could live vicariously in the moment where we made them feel the happiest, where we made them feel the most loved. And in turn, kind of disabling them from paying attention to their own selves and their own behavior. I had friends in my life for 25 years. And just last year, I had to walk away from those relationships. I literally had to say, it is not serving either of us to keep sitting here. You guys tell stories about me when I was struggling in a pain body, but you tell it in a funny way that it isn't funny to me now because I've done healing. And so when you keep telling a story about how I was drunk and passed out and that I was wilding out, like, if you look at that now, that was me in pain. That wasn't fun. You thought it was funny because it masked your ability to connect with me, and it held me to the vibration that you choose to continue living in. So I am disabling, or I'm enabling you to continue being that character in my life. And I can't do it anymore. And so I literally asked them, let me go. Just let me go. I haven't talked to them in almost a year. And I found that I'm not curious about how they're doing. I used to be so curious. And the reason I was curious about people that I've had to leave in life, or our friendships let go, I would be curious about them. And I wasn't curious about them specifically. I was curious about how they still conceived me, how they still thought of me. I was worried about it. I was worried to think like, oh, I hope that they still know me as Shug. I hope they still know that I'm like fun and wild and out here. Now, it's not that I don't care. It's just that I have a different identity to these words. And I am moving through it. And I understand that I'm not at that door anymore. I'm not at that door. You know, when people say, oh, when God shuts a door, a window opens, whatever. I'm not sure how that entire statement is supposed to make me feel better, that there's a smaller opening that I should go through. But I'm telling you, I just went to a different doorway. I went to a different exit point. I went to a space maybe that didn't have a door for a while. I couldn't climb out of it, so I built my own door, okay? And only those that decided to meet me where I'm at got to knock at it, or, you know. So anyway, with these preconceived ideas, people will put that on you. But it's okay to know that our identity and our definitions to words are different. Happiness to me means something totally different to another person. Happiness and labels to me are so different. I don't want to, again, reiterate that I don't want to be dismissive to a person's journey and that they like finally figured out who they are and the label works. I've been there. I didn't know that I was non-binary. I knew that I was neither male nor female, but I didn't, or that I'm both. It doesn't matter because I just want to be, as a friend of mine says, is that I'm post-binary. Like it doesn't really matter in certain instances, but I'm not being dismissive to those that it does and that they're on that journey for. That was just part of my pain body and things that I had to get over for myself and how I could verbalize with me. Labels weren't healthy. They were limiting and they were scary because I had to fulfill the space of that label. And I didn't know how because it wasn't my label. It was a preconceived idea of being happy. So working through those spaces and understanding that it's okay to not be perceived. And maybe to not go out in the world and try to perceive everyone. You know, we want to read the room and know if the energy's right for us. And we want to listen to our gut brain. And then all of a sudden, hindsight is 2020. There's nothing wrong with hindsight showing you later, because maybe sometimes if you went in with such a preconceived idea, you wouldn't have learned the things that you learned. So having a little more grace with yourself. Maybe you don't know exactly how to read a room, then just sit and observe. Just sit and be with yourself in that room. You don't need to show up and give this crazy acting experience. Maybe just sit. See how people react around you when you've always given them what they wanted, and don't give them that next. You get to play with that a little bit in your growth. Again, take it away from people, the fact that they get to live vicariously through you. Take that away for a minute and see what it's like to live vicariously through yourself. See what it's like to be a post-conceived idea, that you did all that you could, that in that moment you were as fluid as possible, you were as understanding as possible to yourself and to the people in the room, instead of trying to fulfill a space. Authenticity, I think sometimes we put so much pressure on, I'm authentic, I'm aware, I'm 100% myself. Let's take a minute to know that sometimes our authenticity is a preconceived idea, and that we want to fulfill a space by being consistent to somebody else's energy draining that they get from you. There's something that I also, to go back to, is with my family. I used to be told, you make me happy, you disappoint me. And instead of, you're enhancing this, you are contributing to this, the root doesn't lay there. So a lot of people, when they say, like, even in relationships, I catch myself, and even with children, I catch myself like saying like, oh, you make me happy. No, you enhance this. You enhance this part. You're enhancing my ability to connect further with myself and redefine what this term means. But putting the pressure on somebody, you make me. No, you make you. You control that. You are the root of that. You decide that. I'm just here to enhance. I'm just here to provoke. I'm just here to maybe not even do anything but be. And if you're uncomfortable, that's yours. So that's really what I just had to share today. I'm not trying to be in a space of like encouraging or discouraging others. It's just more about like, what do you conceive? What have you sat with? And if you could note it now, you're recognizing that you have been trying to fulfill a preconceived idea that doesn't even originate with yourself. And maybe if you could start to alter that a little bit and redefine what some of these terms are that have been thrown at you. Again, mine being happiness, and happiness has such a weird feeling to it for me sometimes because it was rooted in the opposition versus the factual of just happy. Maybe if you sit with that, how you identify yourself and the identifiers that you put out will just be for you instead of people living vicariously through you. So if you get to live vicariously through yourself, what do these words mean? How do they impact you? That's my question. So that's what I got for y'all today. Thank you so much for sitting in this space with me. And just remember, y'all, to just continue creating earnestly in love. We'll talk soon. Thank you.